Hello and welcome to Module 3. In Module 3, we're going to talk about assessment. And assessment is actually one of my favorite topics to teach about and to use within the classroom. Because when we're thinking about our students and what they are learning, we aren't going to know if they've actually learned that content until we administer an assessment. So if you've heard of backward design, when you're looking at the outcomes first, and then you're going to determine how you assess, and then you work backwards to design your lessons. Right here, we're going to be looking at specifically the assessment piece. So throughout this module, we're going to talk about formal versus informal assessments. We're going to talk about traditional versus alternate or authentic assessments. For example, a performance-based assessment. We're going to talk about formative assessments and summative assessments. We're also going to talk about some assessments that are specific to literacy itself. So we're going to talk about informal reading inventories or running records or observations or different ways that you can see how your students are performing in reading and writing within your classroom. And we'll also talk about different assessments that you can use to make sure that you're reaching all of your students within your classroom. Let's go ahead and look in the Blackboard site and we'll see where our Module 3 is. Okay, so you can see within Module 3 there are quite a few objectives. I've talked about some of those already. Obviously those go into a lot more detail, but we'll look at assessment in both a general sense, but also through the lens of a literacy educator. You have a handful of assignments. Some of them are similar to previous, or the structure of assignments in previous modules. You've got your video, which, well done, you're already watching it. Your normal anticipation guide, and Chapter 3. You've got the PowerPoint to go along with it. I do have an additional article in this module for you to read, and it is called Involving Students in Learning Through Rubrics. And so one piece of assessment is making sure that you're setting your criteria and you're making that criteria clear for your students so they can use that formatively either through a self-assessment or toward a future assignment. Then you'll have your discussion board, your Chapter 3 quiz, and your Project 3. So that format should all look similar to what you've seen before. Your project has 4 activities this time. Let me scroll down a little bit here so you can see where we are. Your project has 4 activities. The first one is vocabulary again. There's some really important vocabulary terms in here that you may have heard before, either through visits in the classroom or through being in the classroom. Maybe you just weren't sure what those were, but we're going to really break some of those down this semester. This module. So, for example, what is the difference between a running record and an anecdotal record and an observation? What is the difference between a criterion reference test and a norm reference test? Okay, and so forth. So you have a handful of those, and I want you to think about those specifically in terms of how you could use that in your literacy classroom. So your third column in that project is specific. It has you apply that information specifically to the literacy classroom. And I've also put some additional information in the project. If you don't like using the grid that is on there, that is perfectly fine. I've thrown out an additional idea for this project. You could use Quizlet. Quizlet is an online flashcard generator, essentially. And so you can put your term and your definition, description, and then the uses in the literacy classroom in there. If you want to do that instead of filling out the grid, absolutely, you can use that and then just enter the link on your project so I can go and view your study set. The second activity is working a little more with determining the readability of any texts that you might be using. So you will need to find a textbook of some sort, preferably a student's textbook. If you can't find any textbooks anywhere and the Literacy Center is closed on campus and you can't find any in your library, worst case scenario, you can use the textbook for our course, but I would really prefer you to use one that is not at a higher ed level. So you've got some activities there. You'll go ahead and determine the readability using the Frye readability formula. and then you've got a response for that. And then your third and your fourth activities deal with assessments, where you'll talk about the different types of assessments, and then you'll choose some assessments for a specific literacy unit. And that last activity aligns well with the discussion board. The discussion board prompt for this module has you develop a rubric for a literacy assessment or literacy activity within your classroom. You can use that same activity that you use for your activity in the project, or you can come up with a new one, your choice. But do make sure to read your directions carefully as you're going through that process, and I think you'll benefit from the process of not only designing the activity, but designing the rubric. Okay, so I hope you enjoy working through this with assessments. Again, it's one of my favorite topics. If you have any questions, certainly just reach out. But I hope that you are having a wonderful day and enjoy Module 3.